Hello and welcome to another video. I'm Maz and today I'm in Gloucester. And in today's video I'll be trying out this Jaguar XE. A huge thank you to Aaron for lending me his car, and if you are a Jaguar owner and you would like your car featured on the channel, feel free to reach out. A quick overview: the Jaguar XE is Jaguar's compact executive saloon, which ran from 2015 to 2024 as a long-awaited successor to the Jaguar X-Type. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of the old X-Type was that it was based on the Ford Mondeo. This was because it was from a time when Jaguar was part of the Premier Automotive Group, which was owned by Ford. However, the XE shares its platform with the larger XF and the Range Rover Evoque. Whilst the old X-Type was more retro in its design, this is modern and contemporary, and it was designed by Ian Callum, the same man who designed the Aston Martin DB7 and the Jaguar F-Type. And this car was made to compete with the BMW 3 Series, the Mercedes C-Class, the Audi A4, the Lexus IS and the Volvo S60. And the range starts with the 2-litre diesel, specifically the 163, the 180 and the 240, as well as the 2-litre petrol, which this one is. Both are part of Jaguar's Ingenium range. Whilst it was the diesel that was infamous for its issues, this fortunately is a petrol which does not have any of the diesel's shortcomings. And here are the specs for this particular car. There was also the 3-litre supercharged V6 called the XES, but that was only in production for a few years, which originally had 340 PS, but was later uprated to 380. And after the supercharged XE was dropped, in its place came a less powerful successor based on the 2-litre Ingenium petrol called the 300 Sport. And around that time, the XE had a mini facelift, which I'll get back to later. And then in 2019 came its actual facelift, which had a redesigned front end, redesigned taillights and a slightly altered interior. Again, I'll get back to that later. And then in 2021, the XE was withdrawn from the US market, and this was also the time when the facelift got the Pivi Pro infotainment system. And then the XE was finally killed off here in 2024. There was also the limited edition SV Project 8 with its 5-litre supercharged V8, but that car really deserves its own separate review, along with the XES and the XE300 Sport. Originally, the trims were the Pure, the Prestige, the R Sport, which this one is, the Portfolio, and the S, with the facelifted version having the entry-level S, the mid-spec SE, and the top-spec HSE, with the option of having the R-Dynamic appearance pack on all three variants. And unfortunately, with the pre-facelift, you really had to tick all the options to get the car you really wanted. They probably took this idea from the Germans. So here is the front of the Jaguar XE, and here is the key fob. Classic JLR key. This one is already starting to peel, and I absolutely despise the anonymous design of this key fob, as well as it's prone to peeling. And I have a feeling they only did this just so they can cut costs, so they can use the same key fob for Jaguar and Land Rover. Also, this one has a Gloucestershire Jags key tag. But one consolation is the panic button. Mandated in North America, but thankfully Jaguar, Land Rover and Volvo keep this for the UK market as well. So you press it 3 times and the alarm goes off. Coming to the front. So this particular car has the black pack, which means this car has a fully blacked out grille and black inserts on the intakes. Also with the black pack, the mesh on the grille is also gloss black and not discoloured. And you get a nice shiny surround for the front emblem. Here's what the headlights look like. So being an R Sport, it has the bi-xenon headlights as standard with an LED DRL. What I don't like is that the indicator is still halogen. And here's what the bi-xenons look like. And once again, here's the J-blade. Otherwise, the entry-level car will have halogen headlights, and here's what the bumper would look like. Just like on the E-Type and various other Jaguars of its time, you've got this power bulge on the bonnet, very distinct to the Jaguar range. Also, one thing to note, if you get an S or a 300 Sport, your front bumper will look just like this, albeit without the horizontal slat on the intake, and this section here will be either black for the S or satin for the 300 Sport. Coming around, this particular car has the 18-inch 5 spokes, which are distinct to the R Sport. You can also get 19s on this car. And here's what the side vent looks like. Once again, it's an R Sport, and it's also a black pack. Because it's an R Sport, you've got this distinct side skirt here. Here's what the side view looks like. Very coupe-like in its silhouette. And due to its very short rear deck, I have a feeling this was supposed to be a hatchback originally. And one thing distinct to the XE is this very sharp kink on the glass area of the window surround, but not so much on the outer edge. This one doesn't have a sunroof, but unlike the C-Class, it did not span the entire roof. And this car has a shark fin. Coming to the back isn't as distinct as the front, and the silhouette of the taillights do look very Audi A4 like, but just to make it distinct, you've got this DRL set. You've got this running light section here, which has a stripe followed by an extrusion. This style here is seen on other Jaguars in the range and is inspired by the original E-Type. The facelifted cars have the chicane ones instead. Even though this has a black pack, it still has chrome badges, but this was remedied on the facelift. Once again, it's an XE, and 20T means it's a 2-litre petrol. If it were to be a diesel, it would be 20D, but on the facelifted cars, they changed it to either D180, P250, or P300. D meaning diesel, P meaning petrol, and the number would denote the power in PS. Because it's a petrol, it has one exhaust on each end. If it were to be a 163 diesel, it would have a tiny downpipe tucked away. If it were to be a 180, it would have 2 tips on the left. And all petrols have these exhausts, as well as the higher powered diesel and the S. However, with the S, you get a gloss black lower valance. Coming to the boot. This is the downside of having a saloon boot. You get this very tiny opening, and like I said, it has a very short rear deck. Here's how much space you get. This is where the AdBlue would be on diesel cars. You get a nice hook here, a slight storage cubby here. This is where the 12-volt socket would be, along with another coat hook. This particular car does not have the fold-down rear seats. Otherwise, the tabs would have been here. You also get some extra space here on the back, but only some. And you get the battery here instead of the front for weight distribution. And this particular car has no spare wheel. Higher spec models would have had an electronic tailgate, but in this one, all you have to do is pull on this tab and close. Coming to the back. Try again. So you could program the key to unlock only the driver's door if you hit unlock once, which the owner of this car did. So in this case, I had to press the unlock button twice. But you can code it to be only once otherwise. Here's the downside of the rear doors. You've got this massive opening. The door itself is bigger than the opening, leaving this massive negative space. As a result, in tight parking spaces, it can be a bit tricky to get in and out of the car. The seats are exactly like the ones on the XF that I used to own. This particular car could do with some mats, And here's what the doors look like. Not much padding on the armrest, very tiny door pockets, and the speaker looks a bit too big. And the window switch is very utilitarian, as if it was originally made for a Land Rover. And you get a silver door handle. Okay, sat inside now, and for me headroom is okay, but taller adults will struggle, especially when the roof slopes down. And the big disadvantage with the XC is legroom. So I'm sat behind my driving position. That's all the knee room I have, and I can barely stretch underneath the seat. Otherwise, this seat is exactly like the one I had on my R Sport XF. And unfortunately, these are the best seats you can get in terms of material. They feel more vinyl-y, and Jaguar do have Windsor leather, but I think it's only reserved for the Portfolio and the Project 8, because I have driven an S model in Newport which had the exact same seats. Otherwise, I do like the contrast stitching on the seats and on the door. Unfortunately, you can see a little bit of exterior paint through the door panel. Probably the same on the XF, but mine was black. You get Isofix anchor points, and let me guess, yes, they are removable ones as well, so you can risk losing them. If this were to be a BMW, they would be hinged. Here's the rear armrest with 2 cup holders. Those coasters are aftermarket, and as you can see, no through loading. The lack of sunroof does mean it's quite dark in here, especially with the black ebony headlining, which is in mortise material. But some Jaguars do come with fake suede, and you can sort of see where the sunroof would have been if this car had it. So it would cover from here to about there. They call it panoramic, but from the inside it's normal sized. Otherwise it would clash with the interior light, like so. Luckily you do have damped grab handles and a coat hook. And just like on my XF, the surround for the doors is in fake suede. You do get nets behind the seats, but I do think pockets would have looked nicer and more upmarket. The air vents say Jaguar on the adjusters. And again, this one only has the basic rear climate, so that's all you have. And a single 12-volt socket. If you want, you could have had more on here, or even have tri-zone climate control, which gives you the ability to raise and lower the temperature for the back. And this car still has its original leather care label on the passenger headrest. And another downside, these door tops aren't very comfortable for resting your arm. And as I've mentioned, there's not much padding on them. Coming to the driver's door. Now this cover here, you put in the metal key blade in there, and then this would pop out. So if the battery in the fob is dead, you can manually get in by removing this cover. Once again, because it's a cover, there is a risk that you may lose them. And the mirrors are exactly like the ones you get on the XF. And I've mentioned this car has black pack, so you can actually not have black pack but still have black window surrounds. That's how my XF was originally spec'd. Otherwise, I digress. Coming inside, the interior view is much more improved from here, but once again it's got the same hard door tops, very chunky utilitarian window switches, which I did say are very Land Rover like, but they are actually shared with Volvo. Once again, you got this massive speaker and tiny door pocket, and you get R Sport kick plates. Now with the XE they curve this way, but on the XF they curve that way. And my XF originally had R Sport kick plates, which I've then later replaced to Union jacks, available on the XE as well. And you can also opt for illuminated kick plates. Once again, no floor mats, Otherwise you can have standard, rubber or shag pile. And unfortunately, even on the R Sport, they are an option. Again, I've mentioned this is a lower spec car, so most of the seat adjusters are manual. The only exception is the backrest. And this window switch is very 1990s. And this particular car even requires you to pull a lever to move the seat forward or back. Now coming inside, it does feel very sports car-like, because you're immediately greeted with this wraparound hoop. It's called a Riva hoop, and it is inspired by an Italian speedboat. And because in the XE the outer edges of the dash curve downwards, the hoop does stand out more than on the XF, especially when this particular car has a silver one. And in the XE you do feel like you're in a much sportier car than on the larger XF. Otherwise, here is my point of view. It's the exact same steering wheel as the X260 XF. The airbag, very similar to what you get in an F-Type, but the prongs are slightly different and you don't get the gloss black ring around here. The dials are again the same as the ones you get on the XF. I mentioned this is a pre-facelift, but it's also a mini facelift, so you do get other tweaks that the XE originally didn't come with. The central screen is one of them, and the rounder fonts for the dials. Another example is the frameless interior mirror, and you get a larger infotainment screen, which I'll get back to later on. And originally the XE had exposed cup holders, but this one has a cover just like the one on the XF. However, manual ones do not have this cover. And speaking of manuals, yes, this car was available with a 6-speed manual, but most XEs came with this ZF 8-speed gearbox. And personally, I wouldn't bother with the manual at all, because with the auto, the car does this. And then to put it into gear, you just turn the dial, and to put it into sport, you press down and turn again. Otherwise, when you turn it off, it goes back into its place. That Jaguar emblem is aftermarket, and once again, we'll get back to the screen later. Once again, the air vents say Jaguars on the adjusters, and this dashboard was originally used on the F-Pace as well, but when they facelifted the F-Pace, they gave it the XF dashboard. And the facelifted XE had a very similar one as well, just with a bit more silver around here. This car has silver plastic paddles, but you can also get the plain black ones, but I think they're on the non-R Sports. You can also get silver metal or red metal. Over here you've got the same adjusters for the strength of the dials, lane keeping assist, and a releaser for the boot. This one does not have memory seats, so you get a much larger cutout for storage or just to hold on to when closing the door. Otherwise, your memory controls will be here. Again, I mentioned about the window switches, and the positioning of this air vent means if you have your hands on the usual 9 and 3, that air vent is going to blow directly onto your hand. Even though there's stitching here, that does not feel like leather at all. And once again, here's what the dash hoop looks like. You've also got a generous glove box. Again, it is the same as the one on the XF, X260. All of this is the same as the XF and the F-Pace. Same with this pad here, which has the heritage lozenges on it as well. Again, this is an auto, and this one has the black piano center trim, but you can have that changed for other veneers as well. Unfortunately, all of this will be gloss black. This is your drive mode selector. This is your ASPC. Not really necessary on an XE, but more useful on a Land Rover. Once again, here are your cup holders. Two big ones and a tiny one in the middle. Here's your center armrest, exactly like the one on the XF. Open it, and you get an okay size center console storage cubby. You've got 2 USBs and a 12-volt socket. And this would be even smaller if this car were to have the upgraded rear climate system. Here's what the seats look like. These seats are bespoke to the R Sport and S models. Other models will have less sportier looking seats. And one thing I like about the R Sport seats is that the backrest sort of integrates into the headrest. Otherwise it is adjustable. Here's what the passenger door looks like. And once again, the locations for the armrests are not quite right, and they are very hard. The stitching again does look very nice here, but that is not leather. Here's your overhead console. So you just tap a light and it turns on, like so. And if you want to reset your interior light, just press and hold like so. That's for your sunglasses. And one thing I like about Jaguars is that I've mentioned about the headliner material. They also wrap the sun visor in that same material as well, so it's nice and soft. And once again, if you were to have the fake suede, they would also wrap this in fake suede as well. Somewhere to store your notes, and you get a large vanity mirror with an LED light inside the cover. You get a nice Jaguar script on the dash, and on the negative spaces of the dash hoop you get these round tweeters. And since we're in this vicinity, you cannot see the wipers from here at all. They are nicely tucked away underneath the black line. And unlike the F-Type, even though there was a manual version of this car, you still get a very large footrest for your left foot. And yes, the start-stop button pulsates like a heartbeat, specifically 74 beats per minute, which is the same as the heart rate of a resting Jaguar cat. Once again, the infotainment screen has the Jaguar leaper. Press that once to turn on the ignition. The dials sweep. Quickly turn off the HVAC for now. And you get these 2 screens show up behind the black panel. These are of course for the temperature. And here would have been a CD player if you would so preferred, though personally I wouldn't bother. This particular car, as I've mentioned, has a larger screen because it's a mini facelift. It has the In Control Touch Pro. As a result, that's your ASPC I mentioned. You get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You got In Control apps, and because I'm not in an F-Type, you've got your eco data, your pedal management, your revs, and your braking. And you can also check how well you did previously. And strangely, the image of the XE in question is a facelifted model. Otherwise it's pretty much the same as the infotainment screen on all other Jaguars of this era. And even this map thinks we're in the middle of nowhere, despite being in a car park. And this button here just shows you the Jaguar screen. Here's what the dials look like and the central screen. Right now it's set to trip summary, but you can also choose to have the radio, nothing, or the Jaguar script. So controlling it through this D-pad here, you can go to display, info panel. As I've mentioned, you got the logo, which is the leaper, trip summary, which is what it is right now, media, or driver assistance. And if you were to take the ferry to Ireland, you can also change the units to metric, like so. Otherwise, I'm not going to showcase too much here because this is not my personal car at the end of the day. So let's just leave it as is. Despite the infotainment screen showcasing the facelifted model, between the dials, when changing drive modes, it showcases the pre-facelift XE. And finally, you can also adjust what you want shown here by pressing this button here, like so. And because it's a saloon, you do not get a rear wiper, so this button here is blanked out. Otherwise, this would have been for the rear wipers on the F-Pace or the Sport Brake XF. And this car does not have a heated steering wheel. Otherwise, it can be retrofitted. And unlike a car from Germany, which would have its speedo going 20, 40, 60, 80, because it's a Jaguar, the speedo goes 10, 30, 50, 70. And the reason being is that 30 is your average residential speed limit and 70 is your average motorway speed limit. So that's the exterior and interior done now, so let's see what this car is like to drive. So seat belt is already on, foot on the brake, start the car. The startup sound is very similar to the diesel XF that I owned, but the petrol engine itself does sound okay. So it has a very low down growl around 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, and then after 3,000 RPM the turbo starts spooling. So for a standard 2 litre that is actually okay. So into drive and off we go. Now from first impressions I do feel very familiar with this interior. I know I've just said it has a different dashboard to the XF. The doors are distinctively different, especially when it's questionable armrest positionings and very hard ones as well. But I recognize the steering wheel, I recognize the seats, I recognize this entire center console arrangement, and I recognize these HVAC systems, and I recognize these indicator stalks. But unlike the XF, this XC definitely has a more sportier feeling interior. From where I'm sat, I could be sat in a sports car, whereas the XF undoubtedly felt more executive. Let's turn off the start-stop. As I was saying, from where I'm sat, the car does feel more sporty, especially with the corners of the dashboard curving downwards, and this line here making you feel hemmed in. The XF does have this line here, but because of the high dash it doesn't really stand out as much, and brakes are nice and smooth. Steering is somewhat weighted, but not that heavy, so it's only when you compare it to a C-Class that it feels somewhat weighted. There's another XC over there. And here in stop-start traffic, I do feel isolated from the outside world, and I know I've said that in many other cars, especially with the weather being a bit hit and miss. I do feel like I'm in my own bubble, especially with the aforementioned hoop in front of me. Like I said, the weighty steering does make it feel sportier, so closer to 3 Series than C-Class, but at the same time it does not compromise the comfort aspect of this car. So this car is easily on par, if not better, than the 3 Series of its time. But at the same time, I do think it holds well in terms of comfort against a C-Class or a Volvo S60, albeit the C-Class does have lighter steering. And what I do like is that this 2 litre engine is almost inaudible. I've said the same thing about the diesel, but if I were to drive both the petrol and diesel back to back, I think this one would be quieter and, more importantly, smoother, especially with the acceleration. And thanks to the sportier seats, I've got added support on this roundabout, and already I'm in Barton Street, which is a road full of undulations and speed bumps. And so far, this car is coping very well. And one thing I like about Jaguars is that if you were to get the sportier appearance pack, you are not compromised with stiffened suspension. They are the same suspension as you would get in a Prestige or a Portfolio. And like I said, this car has the 18-inch wheels. The entry-level car did have 17-inch wheels, and you can go up to 19s on this car. And I would say, as a comfortable car, this car is doing very well. And more importantly, this car has the industry-leading ZF 8-speed torque converter automatic. The 6-speed manual is available, but personally I think this car does well with the auto, even as a sportier car. And at 30, this car revs to a very low 1200 RPM, and now I'm entering the 20 zone. So if I were to drop to 20, it's revving at exactly 1200 to 1300 RPM once again. So whether you're doing 20 or 30, this car feels equally effortless to maneuver around in. And if I had to be picky, it could do with some softer leather on this R-Sport trim, because even though the Project 8 is a track-focused XE, they still gave you Windsor leather in that car. And yes, I have sat in one, and I can tell you those seats do feel very comfortable. In fact, you get the same performance seats similar to what you get in an F-Type or an F-Pace SVR. I don't think the XE came with extended leather, because otherwise the C-Class does have leatherette, or Artico as they call it, on the dash if you get an AMG line. But otherwise, from the way this car is performing, I have absolutely nothing to complain about. In fact, I would say, because of this petrol engine, I'm enjoying the drive even more. I have driven a facelifted XE diesel around Melksham, but that was during rush hour time, so I couldn't really talk about what that car was like cruising along, because realistically I was only doing 0 to 10 miles per hour along the town centre. But here I'd say the petrol XE does very well and has a much better driving experience than the diesel. In isolation, you will like the way the diesel drives, but just be warned, with the diesels there is a lot to look out for. So all in all, I will recommend you to get the petrol. And I'm now in the city centre, and even though the steering is quite weighted, it is unquestionably light enough for the city centre and moving around parked cars in narrow roads. As I've mentioned, the brakes are nice and smooth, and green light. Accelerator is also very smooth. Steering is very nice. I've mentioned this car does not have a reversing camera, and rearward visibility is very poor with the fastback-like rear end. So if you are looking for an XE, I do recommend looking for one with a reversing camera. And if you do find one without one, you can always have one retrofitted. But all in all, city driving is very good, despite the aforementioned compromised rearward visibility. Front is fine, side's fine, just the rear is the issue. And C-pillar is on the thick side, but most modern cars do have 6 C-pillars. At another red light now. Okay, let's see what this car is like on a sharp left-hander. And turn. Again, it is thanks to these bolstered seats that I did not move out of my seat at all. And body roll, there was no body roll at all. Now, I've been driving this car around in normal mode. There is an eco mode which slows down the car a bit and keeps the revs very low, but this mode can make the car feel very lethargic. But I'd say in this petrol car, setting off is still very smooth. And one thing I've noticed, I've mentioned the screen shows a facelifted XE, but between the dials it shows a pre-facelift. And then one more on the other side for rain, ice and snow. So this one will try to keep the car at a very high gear to prevent slipping. Otherwise, there's only one last thing to find out. See what it's like in the open road. And of course, I've mentioned I'm driving a 2-litre petrol automatic XE. But if you are a manual owner, or an S owner, or a 300 Sport owner, or even a Project 8 owner, and you would like your car featured on the channel, feel free to reach out. And luckily, there's more than enough torque in this petrol car to pull away from traffic lights. As I've mentioned, one last thing to check, see what this car is like on the open road. So for that, I'm gonna press the gear dial down and then turn to sport and then put the drive mode into dynamic, which makes the dials glow red. Also, as I've mentioned, this car is a competitor to the BMW 3 Series. One thing this car has better than the 3 Series is its suspension. So it has double wishbone front suspension and an integral multi-link rear suspension. So as a result, I expect this car to be more dynamic on the open road. Right now we're at a 50, and after this roundabout is going to be all national speed limit. Okay, at the roundabout now, the lights have just turned green. Everything is in maximum attack mode. Turning in. 3, 2, 1, and like I've mentioned, even though I'm in the regular Jaguar XE 2-litre with an automatic, this is definitely a very fun car to drive, and more importantly, a very dynamic car as well, as I enter another large roundabout. And again, it's thanks to that double wishbone front suspension. This car does feel very, very fun to drive, as well as its rear suspension. And I've mentioned about the 3 Series. The 3 Series has a less sophisticated but more traditional McPherson strut suspension system. Okay, we're at a straight now, so let's just turn off everything for the time being. So normal mode, automatic, and at 70, just like my 2-litre Ingenium petrol car, this car revs at just over 2000 RPM, and as a result this car is very easy to cruise in, and it's effortless, and it feels like a suitable Grand Tourer, and more importantly, there's barely any tyre noise or wind noise or engine noise droning along. Let's do a U-turn at that roundabout and see what this car is like in manual mode. So once again, maximum attack, sport, dynamic, pull a paddle to engage manual mode. Are we clear? No, we're not. Now we're clear. Because I'm in a rear-wheel drive car, once I put my foot down in manual mode, it starts to spin its rear tyres just a little bit. And because I'm now in manual mode, the car feels even more eager to accelerate. Rejoining the dual carriageway. 3, 2, 1, and... I would say this is even more fun to drive than the XF. Again, even though I'm in the 2-litre, it still has its dynamic mode, which the 2.2 of the first gen didn't have, and the 2-litre diesel that I owned, the X760, probably due to its size and weight, is probably what watered down the dynamic aspect of that car. Not that I'm complaining, it's still one of the sportiest executive saloons made, but this one, due to its size and lighter weight, feels even more fun to drive. And yes, that's with an automatic. But once again, I am curious what the manual version of the XE is like. Is it more fun to drive? We'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, let's enjoy this ZF 8-speed torque converter. So let's head back to the car park and finalize this video. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching me try out this Jaguar XE. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you are new, ring the bell to stay up to speed, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.